My name's Sarah, and I've been working as a night conductor on the Blue Ridge line for the past 5 years. Most nights are quiet, just me, a few passengers, and the hum of the train cutting through the dark countryside. But one night last winter, something happened that I still can't explain. It started like any other shift. We had about 12 passengers on board, most of them keeping to themselves. I was doing my usual rounds, checking tickets and making small talk, when I noticed a man sitting in the back of the last car. He was in his late 30s, dressed in a dark coat and a worn-out hat. He looked nervous, glancing out the window like he was expecting someone to follow him. When I asked for his ticket, he hesitated before handing it over. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a one-way ticket to the last stop, but something about him felt off. Halfway through the journey, I decided to check on the passengers again. When I reached the last car, the man was gone. His seat was empty, and his ticket was still tucked into the pocket on the back of the seat. I checked the bathrooms, the other cars, even the luggage compartments, but there was no sign of him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I radioed the engineer, asking if anyone had seen him get off the train. "No stops since the last station," he said, "and no one jumped off, unless they did it while we were moving." The other passengers hadn't noticed anything either. It didn't make sense, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he'd slipped off somehow without anyone seeing. When we reached the final stop, I was cleaning the last car when I noticed something under the man's seat. It was a small leather notebook, scuffed and worn like it had been carried around for years. I couldn't resist flipping through it. Most of the pages were filled with frantic, scribbled notes, but one phrase kept repeating: "She's watching me. She knows." At first, I thought it was just paranoia, maybe the guy had some kind of mental illness. But then I noticed a date written on the last page. It was tomorrow. And below it, there was a train number. My train. The next night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. I kept checking the cars, expecting the man to show up again, but he didn't. Instead, a different passenger caught my eye, a woman in a long coat and red scarf. She boarded at one of the smaller stations, and the moment she stepped on the train, the air seemed to shift. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the passengers like she was looking for someone. When she spotted me, she gave a tight smile, but there was something cold about it. "Busy night?" she asked, her voice smooth and calm. "Not too bad," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She handed me her ticket, and as I moved to punch it, I noticed the name, Eleanor Gray. It didn't mean anything to me at the time, but I'd soon wish it had. Later that night, I found Eleanor standing in the last car, staring out the window. She seemed lost in thought, but when I approached, she turned abruptly. "Have you seen a man with a dark coat and a hat?" she asked. Her tone was casual, but her eyes betrayed something more: urgency, maybe even fear. I hesitated before answering. "Not tonight," I said carefully. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she nodded. "If you see him, let me know. It's important." As she walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if she was connected to the man from the night before. And if she was, what had he been running from? The train rolled on through the silent night, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks the only sound. I couldn't shake the unease Eleanor Gray had left behind. She wasn't just another passenger, she was hunting for something, or someone. As I made another round, I found her seat empty. A glance around the car confirmed she was gone, but her red scarf was draped neatly over the back of the chair. I decided to check the last car, and that's when I saw it, a door to the maintenance area, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into the dimly lit space. At first, it seemed empty, but then I spotted a glint of something metallic on the floor. It was a key, old and heavy, with a tag that read Locker 13. What was this doing here? And more importantly, why had Eleanor left it behind? Returning to the main car, I found Eleanor waiting by the door to the next car, her face pale under the flickering overhead light. "You've found it, haven't you?" she asked softly, her eyes locking onto mine. I hesitated but showed her the key. Her expression shifted relief mixed with something darker. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice low. "That key doesn't belong to you. You need to give it to me and forget you ever saw it." "Why?" I asked, my curiosity overriding my fear. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Because if you don't, they'll come for you too." Before I could press her further, she snatched the key from my hand and slipped away into the next car. I couldn't just let her walk away. Something about this felt too big to ignore. I followed her through the narrow corridors, past sleeping passengers and empty seats. When I reached the luggage car, I found Eleanor crouched beside a large trunk. She was trying to unlock it with the key. Her hands trembled, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if she expected someone to burst in at any moment. "What's in there?" I asked, stepping closer. "Stay back," she hissed. "You don't understand what you're getting into." But before she could open the trunk, the train jolted to a sudden stop, throwing both of us off balance. As the train screeched to a halt in the middle of nowhere, I heard hurried footsteps approaching. 3 men in dark suits entered the luggage car, their faces hard and unyielding. Eleanor froze, clutching the key tightly in her hand. "You're too late," she spat at them, her voice defiant. One of the men stepped forward. "Hand it over, Miss Gray. You know this doesn't end well for you." I couldn't just stand there. "What's going on?" I demanded. The man turned to me, his expression cold. "This doesn't concern you. Leave," but Eleanor looked at me with pleading eyes. "Don't let them take it," she whispered. The men advanced, and I realized I had to act fast. Without thinking, I lunged for the trunk and threw it open. Inside was a leather-bound journal, old and worn, much like the one the man from the night before had left behind. But this one was thicker, with maps, codes, and strange symbols scrawled across its pages. The men froze at the sight of it. Eleanor used the distraction to grab the journal and make a break for the door. "Run!" she shouted at me. I didn't need to be told twice. I followed her out of the luggage car as the men gave chase, their shouts echoing through the train. Eleanor led me through the train cars, her movements quick and deliberate. She seemed to know exactly where to go, but the men were gaining on us. "We can't outrun them forever," I shouted. She didn't answer, instead darting into the conductor's cabin. The engineer looked up, startled, but Eleanor pulled a small knife from her coat and cut the emergency brake cord. The train shuddered, but we kept moving, now completely out of anyone's control. "That'll buy us some time," she said, "but we have to get off this train." The train barreled toward a bridge that spanned a deep, rocky gorge. Eleanor pulled open a door and looked back at me. "You trust me?" Before I could answer, she jumped. I hesitated for only a second before following. The wind roared in my ears as I hit the freezing river below. The current dragged me downstream, but I managed to claw my way to the shore, coughing and shaking. Eleanor was already there, clutching the journal to her chest. "Come on," she urged. "We don't have much time." We stumbled through the woods until we reached an old hunting cabin. Inside, Eleanor finally collapsed, breathing hard. "They'll find us soon," she said. "But I have to tell you the truth." She opened the journal and flipped to a page filled with strange symbols and coordinates. "This isn't just a book, it's a map to something powerful, something they'll kill to control." "What is it?" I asked, my head spinning. She looked at me, her expression grim. "It's proof of corruption, of secrets that could bring down entire governments. Adam, the man from the train, he found it first. He passed the key to me before they got to him. The men found us before sunrise. They surrounded the cabin, their footsteps crunching in the snow outside." Eleanor handed me the journal. "Take this and run. Find someone you trust, someone who can use it." "What about you?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "I'll hold them off." Before I could protest, she opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The last thing I saw was her raising her hands as the men advanced. I slipped out through a back window, clutching the journal. Her sacrifice gave me just enough time to disappear into the forest. Days later, I found myself in a small motel, flipping through the journal under the dim light of a flickering lamp. It was filled with names, dates, locations, evidence that could change everything. I thought about Eleanor's words, "Find someone you trust." But who could I trust? The men on the train weren't just criminals, they were part of something bigger, something dangerous. For now, all I could do was stay on the move, the journal my only protection. Eleanor had trusted me with the truth, and I wasn't going to let her sacrifice be in vain. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't just running anymore, I was fighting back.